"Daddy, the door's stuck again." Caleb Harlow cursed under his breath as he set down the rusted wrench and wiped his hands on the back of his jeans. His 6-year-old daughter, Daisy, stood at the front of the tiny rental, tugging at the jammed door like her little arms could will it open. All right, I'm coming," he said, grabbing his toolbox. The past year had been a mess. After his wife passed away, everything spiraled. The construction company he worked for downsized, leaving him scrambling for jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. They moved into the cheapest place he could find, a 1-bedroom off a side street in the rundown part of town. Daisy got the bedroom. He slept on the couch. He replaced locks and patched drywall for landlords who didn't want to hire real contractors. Today, he was supposed to fix a front door lock for a woman in a fancy brownstone across town, some emergency call through a buddy who owed him. Caleb scooped Daisy into his arms, kissed the top of her head, and said, "I'll drop you with Mrs. Lacey, then I gotta go fix a door for someone with more money than time." The brownstone was pristine. Not just expensive, this place belonged on a magazine cover. Polished brass fixtures, marble steps, and a black SUV parked out front that probably cost more than his last 3 jobs combined. Caleb knocked, no answer. He knocked again, harder. The door creaked open slightly. "Hello," he called out. A woman's voice floated out, calm but distracted. "It's unlocked. Go ahead." He stepped inside cautiously, taking in the high ceilings and sunlight streaming through massive windows. The place smelled like vanilla and something expensive he couldn't name. Then she appeared. She was barefoot, wearing jeans and a white blouse, her dark hair tied up in a loose knot. Gorgeous didn't even cover it. But there was something else, an ease in the way she moved, like she didn't care what anyone thought. "You're here about the lock," Caleb cleared his throat. "Yeah, you said the front wouldn't close properly," she nodded. "It keeps jamming. I had someone out last week, but it's still a mess." "I'm sorry, I know this place is a bit much," he raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I've worked in buildings with rats bigger than my kid. This is not a bit much," she laughed, the sound soft but full. "I'm Genevieve Monroe, Caleb." Caleb Harlow. He got to work, pulling out tools and kneeling by the doorframe. She watched him for a minute before disappearing into another room. A minute later, she returned with 2 glasses of lemonade. "It's fresh," she said, handing him one. He looked up, surprised. "I'm not used to getting served anything on these jobs." Genevieve leaned against the wall. "You're not like the others they usually send." He gave a one-shouldered shrug. "I'm not officially with the company, just helping out a friend who's on vacation." She tilted her head. "You're good at this." "Been doing it since I was 16, he said, tightening a screw. "Need to be when you're raising a kid." Her eyes softened. "You have children?" "Just one, Daisy. She's 6, smart as anything, talks too much." He grinned. "Just like her mom." Genevieve looked at him for a beat longer than necessary, something unreadable in her eyes. "You're a single dad." "Yeah," he said, voice quieter now. "Her mom passed last year, car accident." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle. He nodded, not needing sympathy but appreciating the honesty in her tone. By the time he finished, the door was working like new. "You didn't have to give me lemonade," he said, standing and wiping his hands. "You didn't have to fix the door so well," she replied with a smile. He gave her a look. "You want me to invoice you or?" Genevieve hesitated. "Actually, would it be crazy if I asked you to look at something else while you're here? The kitchen cabinet door keeps swinging wide every time I open it." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." "Getting asked to stay longer," she smiled. "I don't usually have people around who know how to fix things." He followed her into the kitchen, noticing the designer appliances and sleek marble countertops. Everything screamed money, and yet she didn't. As he worked, she leaned against the island and asked, "So you do all this solo? No crew?" "Can't afford one," he admitted. "I take jobs that pay cash and keep me close to home. Daisy's first grade this year. I try to walk her into school when I can." "That's really sweet," she said, almost like she hadn't expected a man like him to say that. He tightened the hinge on the cabinet and stood up. "There, no more runaway doors." Genevieve looked at him, her smile softening. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Would you be willing to come back this week?" "There's a few other things I could use help with. Nothing urgent, just little things." Caleb hesitated. Her tone wasn't flirty, it was curious, hopeful. I can come by Thursday. After dropping Daisy off, her smile widened. Perfect. On Thursday, she offered him coffee. This time, with muffins, on Monday, she asked about Daisy, and he showed her a picture of his daughter holding a stuffed unicorn. By the following week, he was fixing her patio door while Genevieve stood beside him, asking about his life like she actually cared. And she did. She wasn't just watching him work, she was watching him, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was nervous, the way he lit up when he talked about Daisy, the way he refused to charge her much, even though he clearly needed the money. She couldn't stop thinking about him. And Caleb. He couldn't stop thinking about her either. He'd lie awake on the couch at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of woman lived in a house like that alone. Wondering why she looked at him like he was worth something. Wondering if he was insane for wanting to know her better. But he didn't know the full truth. He didn't know Genevieve Monroe wasn't just a woman with a nice house. She was the billionaire CEO of Monroe & Vale, one of the most powerful fashion tech brands in the world, and the man she was falling for had no idea who she really was. Caleb paused at the edge of the sidewalk, staring up at the townhouse like it had changed overnight. It hadn't, but something had shifted in him. Maybe it was the way Genevieve had looked at him the last time he was here, like he wasn't just the guy fixing her cabinets. Like she saw something beneath the tired eyes and calloused hands. He exhaled slowly, ran a hand through his hair, then walked up the steps. This time, the door opened before he could knock. "Hi," Genevieve said, leaning against the frame. Her hair was down, and she wore a navy blouse tucked into tailored pants. Elegant but simple. "Hey," Caleb replied, lifting the small black case in his hand. "Brought a stud finder. You said the frame in the hallway kept tilting." She stepped aside to let him in. "It's driving me insane. I've straightened it 100 times and it still leans like it's drunk." He chuckled, setting his case down. "Let me take a look." She followed him as he knelt by the wall, measuring distance with quiet precision. Silence hung between them, soft but expectant. Then Genevieve spoke. "You ever think about doing this full-time, starting your own business?" Caleb tightened a screw, not looking up. "Thought about it, but I don't have the upfront cash. And contractors need licenses, insurance, it's a lot." "You'd be good at it," she said, her voice steady. He looked up. "You don't even know what my books look like." "I don't need to. You show up on time, you pay attention, and you don't cut corners. That's rarer than you think." Caleb stood and brushed off his jeans. "You sound like someone who's hired a lot of people." Genevieve hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." He nodded toward the hallway. "Frames fixed. The nail was barely in the stud. I anchored it." She tilted her head. "You always this good at fixing other people's problems," he half grinned. "Not my own, apparently." A silence followed, the kind that buzzed with things not being said. Genevieve crossed her arms loosely, then asked, "How long have you lived in the city?" 4 years, he said. "Before that, we were in upstate. My wife grew up there. After she died, I needed a change. Somewhere with more opportunity." Her gaze softened. "And is it better here?" "I thought it would be," Caleb replied. "But it's hard to catch your breath when rent's always one step ahead of your paycheck." Genevieve walked past him into the kitchen, waving for him to follow. "Coffee." "I just made a fresh pot." He trailed after her, suddenly aware of the contrast between them. Every inch of this house was pristine, deliberate, and here he was, with dust on his shirt and calluses on his hands. She poured 2 mugs and handed him one. "I was thinking," she said carefully. "I have a beach house in Montauk. I don't go often, but it needs a few repairs. Doors swelling from humidity, a broken railing on the deck, that kind of thing." Caleb took a sip. "You want me to take a look? If you're free next weekend, you could bring Daisy. There's a guest cottage next to the main house. It's quiet, peaceful." He blinked. "You serious?" "Why wouldn't I be? I charge by the hour," he said slowly. "And that drive alone, it's all covered," she said. "Fuel, supplies, you'll be paid well." "I just want someone I trust." He stared at her, unsure if this was still about the railing. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to know I feel safe with you," she said simply. "And that's rare for me." His jaw tightened. He didn't want to read into it, but he also couldn't ignore the way her voice had dipped at the end of the sentence. "All right," he said. "I'll talk to Daisy's babysitter. If she's free, we'll come." Genevieve smiled, wide and unfiltered. "Great." Caleb left an hour later with a list of needed tools and a GPS pin to a beach town he'd never dreamed of visiting. Daisy tugged at the hem of her sundress as they stood in front of the beach house the following Saturday. The sky stretched wide overhead, and the wind carried the scent of salt and something sweet from the nearby dunes. The house was massive whitewashed wood, glass railings, and pale shutters. Next to it, the guest cottage was almost as big as their entire apartment. Genevieve greeted them barefoot, a denim jacket slung over her shoulder and her hair tousled by the breeze. "Hi, Daisy," she said, bending slightly to meet her eyes. "You must be the boss," Daisy giggled. "Daddy says I'm the supervisor," Genevieve winked. "Then I better be on my best behavior." She gave Caleb a brief look, not flirty, but charged with something warmer, deeper. Inside the house, Genevieve led them through the living room and out onto the back deck. The broken railing leaned against the corner, splintered at one edge. "Storm last month," she explained. "The wind here doesn't play nice." Caleb examined the damage, mentally calculating materials. "I'll need to pick up lumber, hardware store around here. I'll send my driver," she said casually. He blinked. "You have a driver?" She gave him a look. "I hate parallel parking." He didn't push, but the question sat heavy in his chest. Who exactly was she? Later, while Daisy played with seashells on the sand, Caleb worked in the sunlight, measuring and sawing. Genevieve sat nearby with a book open in her lap, though her eyes rarely left him. "You ever get time to yourself?" she asked. "Not really," he said between hammer strikes. "Daisy keeps me busy." "You don't date?" He glanced up, surprised. "Not much room for that." She nodded slowly. "You should." He paused, then put the hammer down. "You asking?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Would you say yes?" He considered her for a moment. The wind tugged at the edges of her jacket, and the sunlight caught the gold chain around her neck. "Depends," he said. "You always this full of surprises." "Only the good kind," she replied. That night, after Daisy fell asleep in the guest cottage, Caleb found himself back on the deck, watching the waves. Genevieve joined him with 2 glasses of wine. "I'm not good at small talk," she said, offering him one. "Then skip it," he replied. She sat across from him, pulling her knees up into the chair. The silence between them was comfortable, natural. "I run a company," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "A big one. Fashion tech. Monroe and Vale," he blinked. "That's you," she nodded. "I didn't tell you at first because I didn't want that to be the headline." He stared at her, processing. "You're a billionaire." "Yes," he laughed once, disbelieving. "And you invited me to your beach house." "I invited you," she said gently, "because I like you." Caleb stood abruptly, walking to the edge of the deck. The waves crashed below, relentless and uncaring. "You could have anyone," he said, voice strained. "Why me?" Genevieve walked over, standing beside him. "Because no one else ever made me feel normal, or safe, or seen." He looked at her, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "You should have told me." "I know, I'm telling you now," he exhaled slowly. "This doesn't make sense." "Maybe it doesn't have to." He studied her face, and for the first time he didn't see the house or the money or the mystery. He just saw her, and that terrified him. But it also made him want to stay. The sky was just beginning to blush with the promise of dawn when Caleb stepped barefoot onto the deck, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. The sea stretched out before him, endless and quiet, its surface barely rippling under the early morning breeze. Behind him, the guest cottage was still and peaceful, Daisy fast asleep beneath a cartoon print blanket she'd insisted on bringing from home. He wasn't sure what had woken him. Maybe it had been the weight of everything he'd learned the night before, or maybe it was something deeper. Restlessness wasn't new, it had followed him since the accident, but this was different. This was the kind that came with a pulse of something unfamiliar, something that felt a lot like hope. The deck door creaked behind him. Genevieve, wrapped in a pale cashmere robe, stepped out with a second cup of coffee in her hand. "I thought I was the only one up," she said. "You're not," he replied, taking a sip. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment, watching the waves. "I didn't sleep much," she finally admitted. "Me neither." He didn't have to ask why. They both knew. Her revelation had landed like a thunderclap, and yet everything about her now, in the quiet morning light, felt even more real than it had before. She turned to face him. "You didn't say much after I told you. I didn't know what to say." "Well, I'm still me," she said softly. "I know that," he replied, "but it's a lot to process." "I didn't lie to you, Caleb." "No, but you held something big back. I did, she said without flinching. Because I didn't want what I have to change how you see who I am. He looked at her, really looked at her. It doesn't, but it changes what this is. Genevieve met his gaze. Does it make you want to walk away? He didn't answer right away. The breeze picked up, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. He reached out and tucked it behind her ear without thinking. I don't know what this is yet, he said, but I'm not walking away. Her shoulders loosened with a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Good. They stood in the silence that followed, letting it settle around them like the tide, neither of them ready to break the fragile moment. Later that day, Caleb replaced the broken railing while Genevieve made lunch for Daisy in the main house. He worked steadily, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. And when Daisy joined him with a plate of sliced apples and peanut butter, he sat on the steps beside her and watched as she arranged shells in the shape of a heart. Genevieve walked out an hour later in a sleeveless linen dress, effortlessly elegant and barefoot in the grass. She handed him a folded envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Payment." He opened it and stared at the check inside. The number made his stomach flip. "Genevieve, this is too much." "It's not," she said. "That's what your time is worth. I can't take this. You can, and you will." He looked up at her, searching her face for a hint of sarcasm, but there was none, just quiet certainty. "You don't need to impress me," he said. "You already have." "I'm not trying to impress you, Caleb. I'm trying to respect you. That's the difference." He folded the check and tucked it into his pocket, but the weight of it felt heavier than paper. It was a door opening, and he wasn't sure what was on the other side. That evening, as the sun dipped low and orange light spilled across the water, they had dinner on the deck. Daisy fell asleep in a lounge chair with a towel wrapped around her like a cocoon. Caleb carried her inside and returned to find Genevieve lighting a single candle in the center of the table. "You didn't have to go all out," he said, taking the seat across from her. "I didn't," she replied. "This is just dinner, and I wanted to sit with you." They ate quietly, the sound of the waves filling the spaces between bites. Afterward, she stood and walked to the edge of the deck, her back to him. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. He stood slowly. "What is it?" "I'm being interviewed next week. A profile. They want to follow me for a few days." "Capture the human side of the brand." He took a step closer. "Okay, they'll be coming here. I told them I'd be out of the city, and they asked if they could shoot some footage of me in Montauk. Casual, off the clock. And you want me to disappear before they show up?" She turned to him, startled. "No, I want you to be here, but I need you to know what it means. If they see you, they'll ask questions, and I can't control the story once it's public." He crossed his arms, brows drawn. "You think I care what some magazine says about me? I think once people know, everything changes," she said, "and I don't want to lose the version of this that's just ours." He stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Then don't hide me," her breath caught. "I'm not ashamed of where I come from," he continued, "and I'm not afraid of what people think." She studied him, eyes shining. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "But if you're going to ask me to stand beside you in front of cameras, then you have to be willing to stand beside me when there's no spotlight." "I already am." He reached for her hand. "Then let's see what happens." The next day, Caleb and Daisy returned home. The apartment felt smaller somehow, more temporary. He looked around at the chipped tiles and sagging couch, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel defeated by it. That night, as Daisy colored at the kitchen table, he pulled out the check Genevieve had given him and stared at it again. It was enough to fix his truck, pay off the bills, and put something away for emergencies. But more than that, it was a chance to breathe. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't used in a while. "Hey, Lou," he said when the man answered. "I'm thinking of starting my own thing. You still know someone who can help with the paperwork." The following week, he filed to register his own small contracting business, Harlow Home Services. It wasn't flashy, but it was his. When the magazine article came out, there was a photo of Genevieve on the deck, barefoot with the wind in her hair. And beside her, not mentioned by name but unmistakably present, stood Caleb. Holding Daisy's hand, it was the beginning of a story neither of them had expected to write. But it was real, and it was only just beginning. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, dropped through the mail slot in an envelope so thick it looked like it belonged in a movie. Caleb stared at it for a full minute, holding it in hands still rough from sanding drywall earlier that morning. The cardstock was heavy, embossed with gold lettering. Elegant, precise. It was an invitation to the Monroe and Vale Winter Gala, and it had his name on it, not a +1. Not a guest pass, just Caleb Harlow. He turned it over again, half expecting it to vanish. Daisy tugged on his sleeve, a smear of peanut butter across her cheek. "Is that from her?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, looks like it. Can I come?" He crouched beside her. "It's a grown-up thing, Bug. You'll stay with Mrs. Lacey that night, okay?" She gave a dramatic sigh. "Fine, but only if you take a picture of the dessert table." He laughed and kissed the top of her head. Deal. The days leading up to the gala passed in a blur. Between client calls, supply orders, and organizing his first official week as a business owner, Caleb barely had time to think until he opened his closet and realized he didn't own a single thing that belonged in a room filled with people who probably had their shoes custom made in Italy. That's when he found the second envelope tucked inside the original. A handwritten note. Just 2 lines in Genevieve's looping, precise handwriting. "Thought you might need this. No pressure, but I'd like you there." Underneath it was a gift card to an upscale menswear boutique, not flashy. Just thoughtful. He walked into the store the next day and told the tailor he had no idea what he was doing. The man smiled and said, "You came to the right place." On the night of the gala, Caleb stood in front of the mirror in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. He adjusted the collar once, then again, then gave up and ran his fingers through his hair instead. His nerves were louder than usual, but he reminded himself he wasn't there to impress strangers. He was there for her. The venue was a private museum in Midtown, all glass walls and modern art installations. Spotlights lit the entrance like a movie premiere. Caleb stepped out of the black car Genevieve had sent for him and walked up the steps, feeling like someone had airlifted him into an entirely different universe. Inside, everything shimmered. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed beams, and soft music floated through the air like it had been rehearsed for weeks. The crowd was a sea of tuxedos and floor-length gowns. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter echoed from every corner. He scanned the room, heart pounding. Then he saw her. Genevieve stood near a marble column, speaking with 2 older men in suits that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. She wore a navy gown with an open back and a single diamond pin in her hair. When she turned and saw him, her expression changed, not a dramatic gasp or a grand gesture, but something quieter, deeper, a flicker of warmth that cut through the noise like it was meant only for him. She excused herself and crossed the space between them, her heels silent against the polished floor. "You clean up well," she said, her voice low. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "You're something else, Genevieve," her eyes sparkled. "You're not too bad yourself." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then a woman passed by and gave Genevieve a questioning glance. Caleb caught it curious, maybe a little disbelieving. "People here know who I am," she said quietly. "I figured. They'll ask questions." He gave a small nod. "Let them." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who somehow balanced power and vulnerability, who had let him into her world without asking him to change a thing. "I'm not here to pretend, Genevieve. I'm here because you asked me." She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "Then come with me." She led him to a quieter part of the room, near a glass wall that overlooked the city. Lights stretched out in every direction, a mosaic of windows and street lamps and headlights. She leaned against the railing, her fingers laced in front of her. "I never thought I'd bring someone like you into this part of my life," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me? Someone who makes me feel like I can breathe," she said, glancing at him. "This world moves fast. It's always about the next launch, the next headline, the next investor meeting. But when I'm with you, none of that matters." Caleb stepped closer. "Then what does? You," she said. "Daisy, that moment on the beach when you told me you weren't afraid of being seen, that's what matters." He reached for her hand. "I don't care about any of this, Genevieve. The money, the headlines, the cameras. I care about who you are when the lights go off." She smiled, soft and real. "And who's that?" He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "The woman who made my daughter laugh, who brought us to the beach when we couldn't even afford a day trip. Who looked at me like I was more than a guy with a toolbox." The orchestra shifted into a slow melody. Couples drifted toward the center of the room. Genevieve looked at him. "Dance with me." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yeah." They stepped into the crowd and she rested her hand on his shoulder as he guided her with quiet confidence. It wasn't perfect, he wasn't used to formal steps, but it didn't matter. She smiled up at him. "You're a better dancer than you let on." "I had a good teacher once," he said. "In high school, she made us practice with textbooks on our heads." Genevieve laughed. "That explains a lot." As the song ended, applause broke out. The room shifted again, but Caleb didn't move. He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Genevieve, I don't know how this fits, you and me. Our lives are so different." "I know," she said, "but I want to try." Her eyes didn't waver. "So do I." Outside, the city pulsed with energy, but inside it was just them. 3 weeks later, Caleb stood in front of a storefront. It had taken everything he'd saved, plus the payment from Montauk, plus a little faith. The sign above the door read, "Harlow Home Services." Genevieve stood beside him, her coat wrapped tight against the cold. "You sure about this?" she asked. He nodded. "I've never been more sure." Inside, the office was small but clean. A desk, a corkboard with upcoming jobs, a shelf with Daisy's drawing of their old apartment taped beside the business license. Genevieve walked over to the desk and placed a small box on top. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a custom-engraved nameplate. "Caleb Harlow, owner." He looked up at her, eyes wide. "You earned it," she said. He crossed the space between them and kissed her slow and sure and steady. Later that week, Caleb and Daisy moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with working heat, a real bathtub, and a view of the park. It wasn't massive, but it was theirs. And Genevieve. She was there every Sunday morning, sitting on the floor with Daisy, helping her build castles out of cereal boxes and glitter glue. They didn't talk about the future in vague terms anymore. They made plans, together. Because sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most unforgettable endings. And sometimes, a broken lock is the door to everything you didn't know you needed. The wind was sharp against the windows of the new apartment, carrying the first hints of January snow. Caleb leaned against the kitchen counter, rolling up the sleeves of his flannel shirt as Daisy carefully pressed cookie cutters into the dough on the table. Flour dusted her forehead, her small mouth pursed in concentration. "You think she'll like them?" Daisy asked without looking up. "I think she'll love them," Caleb said, reaching over to fix the Santa-shaped cutter she'd twisted sideways. "You made them, that's what counts." Daisy glanced at him. "You like her, don't you?" He paused. "Yeah, I do." "Are you going to marry her?" He stared at her, his heart catching. "That's a big question, Bug." She shrugged, licking icing off her finger. "She's nice, and she doesn't treat me like I'm a baby. She talks to me like I'm real." "That's because you are real," he said, ruffling her curls. "And you're smart enough to know when someone's worth keeping around." Daisy grinned, then went back to decorating, humming a song under her breath. Caleb watched her, the smell of vanilla and cinnamon thick in the air. The apartment was still new boxes half unpacked, curtains not quite hemmed, but it felt like home. And the strange thing was, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He felt steady. That night, after Daisy had gone to bed, Caleb drove across the city to Genevieve's brownstone. He hadn't told her he was coming. He needed to see her face when he handed her the box of lopsided cookies, each one carefully iced by Daisy's small fingers. When she opened the door, barefoot and wrapped in a thick sweater, her expression shifted from surprise to something softer. "They're for you," he said, holding out the box. "From your favorite 6-year-old." Genevieve took it, lifting the lid. "These are alarmingly charming," he laughed. "She worked hard. I can tell this one's got 3 eyes. That's Santa after too much eggnog." She stepped aside to let him in. The living room was dimly lit, a fire flickering in the hearth. She set the box down and turned to face him. "I didn't think I'd see you tonight." "I wanted to," he said simply. They stood close, the warmth from the fire wrapping around them. She looked at him, her eyes searching. "You've been quiet lately." "I've been thinking," he said. "About." Everything, she waited, giving him the space he needed. I know our lives don't run on the same tracks, he continued, but I don't want to be afraid of that anymore. Genevieve stepped closer. You were never less, Caleb. I know that now, he said. I guess I just needed time to believe it. She reached for his hand, her voice quiet. So what now? He studied her face, the one he'd memorized in 100 different lights, and took a breath. I want to build something with you, not just a business or a future, a life. Real, messy. Ours, she blinked once, her throat working. You're not just saying that, I've never been more certain of anything. She kissed him then, slow and steady, her hand finding the curve of his jaw. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was a promise. Later, they curled up on the couch, her legs tucked over his lap as the fire burned low. I have something to tell you, she murmured. He looked at her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I stepped back from the day-to-day at Monroe and Vale. His brow lifted. What? I've been thinking about it for months, delegating more, letting my team lead. I started the company to create freedom, but somewhere along the way I became a prisoner to it. He was quiet, waiting. I still love what I do, but I want space for other things too, like Sunday mornings with you and Daisy, or helping you grow your business, or just breathing. Caleb reached for her hand. You're serious. I've never been more ready, he smiled then, wide and unguarded. You're incredible, you know that, she leaned into him. So are you. Over the next few weeks, their lives began to entwine in small, unspoken ways. Genevieve helped Caleb design a website for Harlow Home Services, insisting it needed a logo that didn't look like it came from clip art. Caleb hung new shelves in her kitchen, reinforced her closet rods, and installed a magnetic knife strip she didn't know she needed until she had it. Daisy started leaving her favorite books at Genevieve's house, one by one. Genevieve began keeping chocolate milk in her fridge and a box of glitter pens in the drawer next to her wine opener. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. One evening, Genevieve sat on Caleb's couch as Daisy traced letters in a workbook on the floor. I was thinking, she said, glancing up, maybe we should take a real trip, somewhere warm, just the three of us. Caleb looked over from the kitchen. Like a vacation, exactly. No gala, no meetings, just sand and sleeping in. He walked over, pulled her up by the hand, and kissed her forehead. I'm in, as long as you promise not to check your email. She raised a brow. Only if you promise not to fix anything while we're there. Daisy popped her head up. Can we build sandcastles? Caleb laughed. Kid, we'll build a sand mansion. Genevieve leaned against him, her voice soft. Let's make a new tradition. They booked the trip that night. A quiet island retreat 2 weeks away. 3 days before they were set to leave, Caleb took Daisy with him to the boutique where his suit had been tailored. He walked straight to the counter. I need something for her, he said, nodding to Daisy. The tailor smiled. Special occasion. Caleb glanced at his daughter, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Yeah, he said, very special. The ring wasn't flashy. A single diamond, set in a slender platinum band. Timeless. He'd chosen it because it reminded him of Genevieve, elegant without needing to try. That evening, he brought her to the rooftop of the building where his first big job had been. It was cold, but the view stretched over the lights of the city, quiet and perfect. He turned to her, heart racing. You changed everything for me, he said. You didn't fix my life, you made me believe I could. She reached for his hand, her eyes shining. I don't want to imagine a world without you in it, he continued. So I'm asking, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, voice thick with emotion. Absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into a kiss that tasted of joy and tears and everything in between. They married in the spring, in the garden behind the brownstone. It was small. Just close friends, Daisy in a yellow dress, and enough flowers to make the bees jealous. Caleb wore a boutonniere Daisy had insisted on pinning herself. Genevieve wore a gown that moved like water, her hair loose around her shoulders. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Caleb leaned in and whispered, "Forever starts now," before kissing her like it was the first time all over again. That night, they danced barefoot under strings of lights and stars. Daisy twirled between them, laughter echoing into the warm air. The next morning, they left for the island. Genevieve turned off her phone. Caleb left his toolbox behind. Daisy packed every swimsuit she owned. They built sandcastles and watched sunsets and fell asleep tangled together on hammocks. And when they returned, life didn't stop being messy, it just became beautifully theirs. Caleb ran his business with pride. Genevieve found balance she hadn't known she needed. Daisy started second grade with a new lunchbox and a family that felt like everything she'd ever wanted. They didn't chase perfect, they lived real together, always.